Today, Martin Luther King Sunday, Martin Luther King Jr. And therefore, the hymns reflecting what I think is probably some of his favorites and also some of the favorites of the communities that he mostly represented. And I often think when we sing these hymns that we don't properly know how to sing them, because most of us probably do not have any idea about the environment and the circumstances from which they were born. And I often think, well, perhaps we're doing a poor imitation of that, but at least we have good intentions. So I think we will be forgiven for that. Sermon title, Not Through the Telescope. Probably a better title would be, I think, Not by the Way of the Telescope. I'll use the passage that was read to you by Rich as the backdrop, the focus, and also the passage as it was repeated by the author of the Gospel of Luke. Very similar words a few centuries later when that Gospel was authored. There is a lot of debate and talk these days, and a lot of articles being published about what's going on in the US mostly, but also how it relates to the world. We have a lot of TV channels, our favorite channels, or channel, breaking news 24 hours a day, the same stuff, breaking 50 times a day. But it's always breaking news. And then you have these expert panels sitting there is proposing or presenting perspectives that is supposed to cover the spectrum of opinions. It's normally a panel comprised of 4 people, very strong people, representing the way or the perspective that the channel wants to broadcast, and then somebody that peeps up now and then in a very inefficient way. And we listen to these experts and these panels, and we are, as good consumers, consume what they give us, our diet of selected and selective information. And then we are outraged about what we were fed because of what the opposition, the other side, what they think. And those idiots and those weaklings, the others on the other side, we like to talk in our echo chambers with people that we know consume the same stream of information and use the same supply chains of information. We like to talk to them to affirm our views. That's what we do. And nobody here, if you differ from me, I challenge you to stand up now and say you're wrong, and to illustrate to me why you're not doing that, or how you're not doing that. That is what we are doing. And in the process, we're also presented with I've already said selective, but also a sanitized view of our reality. Most often, the brutality and the complexity of reality is whitewashed out of the conversations. We do not like a complex, nuanced view. We do not like to be confronted with how I think reality really is. A lot of different shades of gray and very little absolutely black and white, unless you paint it that way, and unless you want to put up the glasses and the lens to view it. that way. We're also often presented with a sanitized version in the sense that the effect of our way of being in the world, the results of that is not shown to us. And we look at it from afar, like through a telescope, because that is safe, and that is comfortable. We have this long-distance view. And the benefit of the telescope is also that it is easily to lose context. You can look at one small thing that you would like to look at, and you focus on that, and you can zoom in on that, and you say, okay, that's my reality. But a telescope is not very good to grasp the bigger context and to look at something else next to that little spot that is your favorite spot and that you really want to look at and that you enjoy looking at, and then sharing that with those that you know espouse your way of looking at the world. And I think we're only beginning to discover now how our own preferences are used to program through social media. The views that we in any case espouse, we are given more of the same. An excellent marketing strategy. Give the consumer what he or she likes, and they'll want more of it, and we're all like a bunch of fools falling for that. And I include myself in the picture. I'm not saying you are fools, I'm saying we. And I think it's a pitiful way of being in the world. I often try to, mostly for reasons of using my time productively when I look at issues in the world, try to get a statistic based on good research, to get a picture, a snapshot of a process, of a long development and of a complex process evolving and developing. And one such a statistic was what I read in the Boston Globe had a series on Boston and racism in Boston. Very interesting session. I'm not, Bostonian, been in the area for a few years, but there's so much I don't know. So I tried to read it. And one day I came across the statistics there. I said, well, this is definitely wrong. Can't be. And that was the number 8. $8. And that $8 represents the net asset value of the average African-American family in Boston. The net asset value, that if you take the household, not an individual as I thought originally, but a household of African-American people living in Boston. And you take their liabilities and their assets, what they have, and the difference between assets and liabilities for that family, average African-American family in the greater Boston area, is $8. $8. It's not the price of lunch of a family. That is for native-born African Americans, people that were born in the US. That is 31,000 times less than for a white family in Boston, whose net asset value is $247,500 on average. For a Dominican family, it's even less. It's $6. For an African family of Caribbean origin, it is the astounding figure of $12,000. And when I read the figure originally, $8, I thought, well, there are a few zeros missing here. Cannot be. But the newspaper confirmed that, no, that is the correct figure. $8. And I think in that number, in that small statistic, we find something that is, or that represents two of the three evils that Dr. King identified based on the philosophy of Josiah Royce, an African philosopher of the 19th century. He said there are three evils in society that leads to injustice. And he identified poverty, racism, and militarism as the three evils. Militarism not only in the sense of military hardware and wars and so forth, but all kinds of violence. Dr. King also had the wisdom in his application of the basic philosophy of Josiah Royce, the philosopher that I mentioned, to identify that those evils are often not represented only, or that they often manifest as symptoms of underlying problems, that there are structural things built into society, into approaches, into cultural preferences, into habits, into policies, into laws that lead to poverty, that entrench racism, that cause violence to happen. And Dr. King also said we should address the underlying causes so that justice in social sense can also take root and can happen. And I mentioned in the beginning that I don't know if I or anybody else that lived so many years after Dr. King can sing the hymns born from those communities that experienced so much of structural injustice. We can sing that. And I often think, I look at those years and the issues through the telescope, from a distance, with no grasp of what I'm really looking at, and no understanding of what a net asset value per average family of $8 in the greater Boston area, what that means. I have no concept of that. Looking at it by the way of the telescope, with very little meaning attached to that. And I often wonder if we don't look at much of our sacred text, the Bible, in the same way. When we listen to the few verses being read about the anointing of the Lord, bringing freedom to those that are oppressed, etc. What does it say to us? There in the third part of the book of Isaiah, probably written by a separate author than the first and the second parts of Isaiah, speaking about Israel being restored and the anointed of the Lord personified in Israel, the whole people of Israel. They will rise up. They will be restored. They will flourish once again. A word spoken to the people after Jerusalem was destroyed and the temple destroyed and they were taken into captivity in Babylon. These words of encouragement and of hope, of Israel being restored, and later on, in that third part of Isaiah, also bringing the application of Israel being the people that will bring other people to God and that will be instrumental in bringing God's new realm, the way of God, to the world. in our entrenching of existing perspectives, in our cherishing of what we think is the right way to look at the world. I think we often commit the sin of avoiding discomfort. We do not want to be discomforted. We do not want to be troubled. There's enough trouble in the world. So what do? Us sitting here and me standing here, all of us. We try to avoid the conversation that we should have as Christians about what the gospel requires of us, what is essential to our tradition, what cannot be avoided if you want to enter through these doors and if you want to say, I am a Christian. Listen to what Jesus said, quoting that same passage, according to the author of the book of Luke. When he was in Nazareth and, according to tradition, was rejected there, chased out of town. He picked up the scroll of the book of Isaiah, according to the author, and he read, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." If we do not want to be discomforted, if we continue to, like a Maginot Line, fortify the existing fortifications, digging the trenches deeper, and look through the telescope to the other side, focusing on what we find despicable and harmful and wrong in their perspectives, we're getting out of the trenches into what we perceive as no man's land to avoid discomfort. Think of the discomfort of having a net asset value per family, an average of $8. Think of the discomfort. Krista sent me a link to an article this morning about a 12-year-old Native American girl in South Dakota. Last week, after the cold spell, or during the cold spell, who got up one morning and went to the bathroom and tried to commit suicide, for the sole reason of being tired of being so cold. Try that for discomfort. I had a disturbing experience during that cold spell. I had to take MJ for some reason to Boston. And we were driving his car, so I was sitting lower than the truck that I normally drive. And it's quite a different in perspective that you have on the world. And as we got off 93 at the regular exit, Roxbury, Dorchester, Molniak, Cass Boulevard, and so forth, close to the Methadone Mile, there's one guy that I know that always stands there to panhandle. And before we left, I had to clear the ice off the bed of my truck, and it was brutally cold. I put on 3 pairs of gloves, but still my hands were freezing after about an hour outside. And as we got off the off-ramp and we stopped at that traffic light before you turn right, there was this guy on the other side of the barrier, concrete barriers, standing there not doing anything. And I looked across the barrier and he looked at me. We made eye contact. It was like this close up. And he smiled at me. I didn't know what to do. We were already moving. I couldn't give him anything. He wasn't asking for anything. He looked at me and he smiled. And I thought to myself, I don't know what to make of this. This is too much for me to digest and to work through. And I asked MJ, who is this guy? He said, no, he's always here, panhandling. And he showed me under that bridge, that's where he lives, where he put his cardboard shack together. In the cold that I couldn't stand with all the warm clothing for an hour, he was standing there for a full shift of a day. And I thought to myself, this is too close up. Being drawn into his world, but I wasn't really drawn into his world. That world cast onto me through that disarming smile. Because I was in the warm safety of a vehicle with glass around me and metal around me, with a heater full blast on. And there was a concrete barrier between us. But I thought to myself, and that's probably where this sermon was born, and it is still a work in progress. I didn't know what to say this morning until about an hour ago, and then there wasn't time to type up the whole thing. But I thought to myself, what we need to get past the way of the telescope is a way of a heart of compassion again. To look at each other through the eyes of the words of the man that we just listened to as well. To look at each other as God's people, not at a distance, but being drawn into each other's worlds by succumbing to the call of the Spirit that is in each one of us to be compassionate and to express that in our actions and living of every day, in the charity that we do, but also in the social justice that we do, in what we do to alleviate poverty, etc., through giving of food, etc., but also to look at what are the causes of poverty and to never step down from addressing those as well. On the bulletin cover of today, let me get mine. You find these words: human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step forward, the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. This is a quote from Dr. King's book. It was published in 1967. Chaos, or the way forward, or where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Let us, as God's people, be the exceptional people. Be that beloved community. Be the community described here, those that have the heart of compassion, those that follow in the Christian way of always having the willingness to investigate yourself and your own views, always the willingness to interrogate your own life, always have the willingness to believe in a God that is a forgiving and a loving God, but also a God that demands that we do not make forgiveness and grace cheap, but that live as committed people to the way of Jesus in the world. Because human progress is not inevitable. Human progress in achieving the beloved community and developing a way of seeing with the heart is based on a true commitment to walk in the ways of Jesus. Seeing with the heart is the only way that we can see past the boundaries that we cherish and the walls that we like to erect and the fortifications that we like to strengthen because we are afraid of something. Let us succumb and become vulnerable to grow and increase a heart of compassion so that we are able to see as far as the telescope while experiencing being one with what we see. May God grant us the wisdom and the courage to be those people. The way of the compassionate heart, not the way of the telescope. Amen.